This is the Provoked Prawn, and this great looking keyboard is the Keychron Q3 Max. A really nice keyboard with some premium features and some really nice highlights to it that make it worth looking at. I've been using this now for a few weeks and testing it out with gaming and everyday use. And I want to talk to you about my experiences with it. As you can see, it's an 80% keyboard with some really funky south-facing RGB LEDs, meaning you've got some nice glow from around the keycaps in terms of the RGB lighting. It features a Bluetooth and wireless connectivity with Bluetooth 5.1 multi-device connectivity and 2.4 gigahertz, 1000 hertz polling rate, which makes it great for gaming, and a choice of different switches. So it uses Gateron switches. I'm going to talk a bit more about that as we go through, and your choice of Gateron Juniper Red, Juniper Brown, and Banana switches. And I'm using the brown ones in this, but it's also swappable in terms of being able to change out the switches as well for either 3-pin or 5-pin. More on that in a minute. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is you can actually reprogram the keyboard using an online web page rather than a dedicated app, so you don't have to download any software. And I want to show you that later on as well, because it's pretty cool. Now, the first thing that struck me when I got it out of the box is how solid it feels and heavy. It's a hefty thing with a good weight to it. You can see it weighs 1,766 grams, so it's pretty heavy. And that speaks to the quality of the thing as well. It features multiple layers of enhanced acoustic foams. It's lubed, it's got good stabilization, and as you can see, it features a number of tools to take it apart as well if you want to tweak any of these things, and spare parts if anything gets lost, so screws for the outside and other bits that you can use when you need to. It also has keycaps, PBT double shot keycaps. Obviously, these aren't designed to let RGB through. They have the lettering on them, but they are PBT double shot, and you have swappable keycaps depending on whether you're going to be using it on Windows or on Mac. Now, I'm a PC user, so I'll be swapping out the pre-installed Mac ones for these, but it's nice to have the option of both in the box, and there's also a button on the keyboard itself you'll see to swap between the two modes, Windows or Mac mode. You also have a USB-C cable included, which you can plug into your PC and to the keyboard, as well as an adapter. So if you don't have a USB-C port on your PC, you can plug this into the USB-A adapter instead, and then plug that in. Now, so you can use it in wired or wireless mode and Bluetooth mode, so you have the options of connectivity. And I found that I didn't have to plug it in very often, I'm happy to report, during my use, because the battery lasts for a long time. See here on the left-hand side, you've got a button to switch between Windows and Mac mode, and either wireless or Bluetooth mode, and into the cabled mode as well. So I wasn't plugging in very often, but I do want to talk about connectivity a bit later on, because I have had some issues with wireless connectivity occasionally, but there is a firmware update that you can grab that might fix that issue, so it might not be a problem for you. And I've got a lot of wireless devices as well. Now, there are a lot of different combinations of keys in here. So you've got a function button that you can press, and included in the box is a little guide on all the different keycaps and the things that you can press in order to change between those. For example, function and Q changes the lighting effect. Function and tab turns the lighting effect on and off, so the backlight on and off. You can adjust the speed of function and T and function and G, increasing and decreasing the speed of the lighting effects. You can adjust the brightness with function and W and S. And there are other things as well. So on the right-hand side of the keyboard, you'll see there's a little light bulb button, for example. You can use that to turn the lighting on and off. So if you don't want it on at any point, you can turn it off. Obviously, you've got a wireless dongle that you can plug into a port on your PC. Or you can plug that into this adapter, which means that you can then plug it into the USB-C cable when it's not plugged into your PC, and then you can put that closer to the keyboard, which obviously means if you are suffering from any wireless signals, you can get that close by, so that it's then not a problem. So you have a lot of flexibility there. Now, included keycaps, as I mentioned, that you can remove the standard ones, so the option and whatever the Mac button would be called, you could take those out in place of the Windows key and the Alt key, which are included here. And the process for removing these and swapping these out with the included tool is really straightforward and easy. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this keyboard is what you can't see, and I'll show you that in a little while, because it has a double gasket design. It's also designed with multiple layers of foam, so sound absorbing foam, PET foam, IXPE foam, and latex pads as well. So I found it was actually very satisfying in terms of the key presses and the action on it. And I'll leave a sound test later on in the video where I'm not talking so you can hear what it sounds like. But my experience with it has been very nice to use. As you can see, these are Gateron brown switches, actually pretty fast and agile for gaming purposes. You have a 4mm max travel distance with these. They are tactile, but you can get the red, which are linear, and bananas as well. So you do have an option and choice of them. Browns are a good sort of point between gaming and office use. So obviously are suitable for both. What you'll notice is if you strip off some of the things, like the spacebar, for example, that it has lube on the relevant areas. So you can see that the switches are nicely lubed, the stabilizers are really nicely lubed as well. So you get good smooth action out of the key switches and out of your presses. But also things like this, like the foam inside the spacebar designed to make it sound nice and feel nice when you're pressing it. So you haven't got any of the horrible pings and rattles that you get from lesser keyboards. So a pretty cool design in a number of ways already, as you can see. Now you also have the tool for pulling out the key switches. So if you want to, you can swap them. Obviously that would be an additional purchase, but you can pull out these switches and you can see they're 3-pin switches, but you'll be able to put 5-pin switches in there if you want to. These do have south-facing LEDs, as I mentioned. Usually you'd see the LED at the top of the switch, but in this instance it's designed to be at the bottom to let the RGB glow around the keycaps, as you can see it doing, rather than through them. You'll see some of these keys also nicely stabilized. Again, a close-up look at how much lube you've got going on there. It's designed to be smooth and satisfying. From the key presses, that's the shift, and then you've got it on the space bar, enter, other keys like that. So the Gateron Browns are a good setup, nice swift action to them. And I found the key presses react really quickly as well. So a nice design there and easy enough to use. I wanted to take these apart just to demonstrate the internals of them because there is extra lube in there. These are pre-lubed as well. So basically everything's already set up for you with the internals being set up to be smooth and to give you a good response. So you don't have to worry about doing this sort of thing yourself. If you're getting a custom keyboard, you might have been thinking about lubing the switches and going through all of that hassle. You don't have to do it here because Keychron's already done it for you. You might be fussy enough that you want to do more, perhaps. Maybe it isn't enough lubrication for you, but you'll see if you take these apart, obviously standard mechanical switch design with the springs and the gold leaf, and then you have the top, which you can see if you take a close look at the top of the switch, you'll see that there is lube on here as well. So you've got some lube down the edges and on the stems of that switch. So nice smooth action from it. As I said, I found it to be quite satisfying to type on and to game with. Not too noisy, and yet still given a good sound when using it, and you'll hear a bit more of that later on. But I haven't found it's been picked up by my microphone, which is really important to me. These aren't the quietest ones, obviously. The red switches are designed to be a bit quieter and to give you a smoother linear action, probably better for gaming if gaming is the main thing you're doing. But you can swap them if you want to. So if you don't like them, you can swap them out. So you can see I'm changing these ones out for some Kale switches and then just do a little sound test to show you the difference between them. So there's a box switch, and I'll leave what these switches are in the description. One of the warnings worth heeding comes on a little pamphlet in the box which tells you to be careful when putting the key switches in that you don't damage any of the pins. And I can assure you that it is worth doing this. Now, this is actually previous damage from a different keyboard, but if you are planning on swapping out the switches, it's very easy to bend the pins, and then you'll find some of the switches don't work, so watch out for that. Now, the thing that's interesting about this is obviously you have the tools for taking the keyboard apart. So if you want to, obviously you don't have to, but you can see elements of this. So I thought it'd be worth taking it apart to show you some of the interesting things that's going on in here and the level of quality that you've got going on. So obviously you can remove the underside plate And then you can see some of the levels of foam and other things. So you've got sound dampening foam in there. You've got latex in there as well. You've got other levels which aren't visible on the other side. And basically protective housing, but also things to just make this sound more pleasant, make it nicer to use. You do have to detach, obviously, the battery from it as well before you can access these things. And you can then go about unscrewing other parts if you want to, but you can see we've got multiple layers going on here as I pull this apart. I didn't want to take the entire thing apart because frankly I'm a bit clumsy and I might end up damaging it, but just removing the back you can see some of what's going on here and the level of detail and quality you're getting for your money. So there's loads of levels of things in it. It's screwed in multiple different parts in here, loads of screws to take out if you do want to go about taking it all apart in here. So a lot more that you'd have to do to fully remove it, but I just wanted to remove the back to be able to show you what is possible. And obviously you've got the tools included in the box to be able to do that, as well as spares if you need them for any reason. So that's a nice addition too. Now the other thing to mention is that this is obviously a wireless keyboard and it's designed with a pretty hefty battery. So the claim is up to 180 hours of battery life with the lighting off entirely, and about 100 hours with it's on its lowest brightness. Now, I'll say I haven't tested to see to that level in terms of 100 hours. What I have found is I definitely haven't had to charge it as much as I have done with other keyboards. So I have basically been using it a whole week and more without having to plug it in. Obviously, with a lot of video editing, a lot of gaming, and a lot of other things going on, and it still just lasted and lasted during that period. So it definitely does hold up in terms of the battery life. It's a 4,000 milliamp battery in there. So it's designed to keep going for a long time. And when you do have to plug it in, that cable's not that obnoxious that it stands out, I don't think. And it ends up being easy to set up and easy to plug in. Now, in terms of the gaming experience, I found it definitely is reactive and nifty. The 1000 hertz polling rate, and obviously you can customize the switches, as I mentioned, so you can change the programming of the switches in the app, and I'll show you that in a little while. But just standard straight out of the box without worrying about messing around with any of that, I found this definitely to be very responsive. Not as much as you'd get from Hall effect switches naturally, or the really fast actuation that you might get from some other gaming keyboards, but this one has a good setup in terms of a nice balance between good for gaming and good for everyday use as well. And I've just found it nice and responsive too. The one thing that I did find, that I did mention already, is that there were some issues with wireless connectivity. I did find that very occasionally there were just issues in it picking up the key presses. And I found, obviously I've got a lot of wireless devices. So I've got a wireless mouse, I've got a wireless headset, other wireless things in proximity to it. So it could just be a signal issue. If you put the wireless dongle closer, it doesn't seem to be as much of a problem. And there is a firmware update that I would recommend grabbing when you get the keyboard that will hopefully help with this, because it hasn't been as much of a problem since doing that. But for gaming, perhaps using it in wired mode might be preferable. You might find that. Now, you do notice you also have the option for Bluetooth connectivity. So it's got Bluetooth 5.1, and you can switch into those modes with function 1, 2, and 3 on the keyboard. So there's different modes there, so you can actually connect it to multiple devices and pair it up with multiple things. So it's got plenty of different use cases, but I'm mostly sticking to wireless connectivity because it's better for gaming purposes. As I mentioned earlier, the Keychron keyboard also allows you to program it via launcher.keychron.com in your web browser. This is pretty interesting because usually you have to download software specifically for keyboard programming and such, but you can do this directly in a browser, which means you can do it anywhere, and you're adding extra bloatware to your PC, which is pretty cool. From here, you can reprogram, remap various different keys, and there are loads of options in here. You'll see you've got basic programming, you've got media keys, you've got macro programmability, and there's a dedicated thing for recording macros in here, and then you can put those in. There are layers of key presses, and you also have special key setups that include things like mouse button presses and movements, so you can actually throw in mouse buttons onto your keyboard as a thing if you want to, and you can see a variety of other keys that you can program in easily. Lighting buttons, custom buttons, and layer options as well, so there's loads of options to go through there. The backlighting can also be adjusted, so as well as the hardware buttons on the keyboard itself that I showed you earlier, you can adjust the brightness and the effects from here, selecting from a number of different effects on there, changing the speed of the animation, adjusting the color of it as well. And it's instantly responding. You don't have to save and upload it. It's just automatically responding to that instantly. And you don't need to keep this web page open, obviously. Then you can record your own macros. So you can go in and you can program different macros and record them in there and set those up. And then obviously program them to specific keys. And you can do that with the keyboard, or you can key map it inputs as well. So you can see you have options in here and what you're doing. And I'd recommend also going to the wireless firmware update. So check in for updates. So there's options to do a general firmware update and a wireless firmware update. I'd recommend checking for both, because as you can see, my wireless firmware was out of date quite significantly. So it's worth doing that, and then that might help with any connectivity issues you're having with the keyboard. And it's nice to see all of this stuff just done in a browser. I've not seen this before. It's fairly unusual. So really easy to be able to do this, interact with it, close the browser down, and not have to worry about anything being hogging your system. So all in all, a really good keyboard for a load of different reasons. Stick around now to hear a sound test.